Hello, friends, and welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast. I am your host, Amber Magnolia Hill, and this is episode 2, the first episode featuring another human. That human is my dear friend, Milla Prince. If you are in my online realm, which I'm guessing you are, since this is only the second episode of the podcast, you probably got here because you know me in some way, then you're probably in Milla's online realm too, because hers is much bigger than mine, and rightfully so. Milla is an herbalist, a writer, teacher, filmmaker, business owner, zine publisher, homesteader, and all-around witch. She grew up in Finland, and the word for witch there is noita, N-O-I-T-A, noita. I think that's a really cool word. It also means shaman, and as Milla has taught me, the word shaman and witch are often interchangeable, and that shamanic practices really were and are witchy practices. So Milla is half Finnish, and she shares a lot about that on Instagram and on her website. Her handle there is The Woman Who Married a Bear, and we get into the story of why she chose that name and the myth behind that name and how it's meaningful to her. So she shares a lot about Finnish folk medicine and food and herbalism, and but what people don't know is that she's also half Palestinian. And the reason that she doesn't share as much about that is because she did not grow up in that culture, and she does not know her father at all, from whom she is descended from the Palestinians. So in this episode, among many other things, we talk about the ways that she has learned to connect with that lineage that she will never know in real life, and the practices that she has cultivated that kind of plug her into that culture and that branch of her ancestry. So you can take a lot from that, dear listener, as you explore your own ancestry, which is something I certainly hope that this podcast inspires you to do. It's really an endless endeavor, and there are always going to be lines going back on your tree that you just can't trace back any further, or you're never really going to know what's there. So I love that we talk about these practices and ways that you can connect into traditions that you don't know, that you don't have any direct experience of, and that you may never know the people who you are descended from, who came from them. So I love the way Milla and I met, and we talk about that for quite a while at the beginning of this episode. It's really funny because it has nothing to do with herbalism or ancestry or any of the things that we are both doing now. We teach together about those things. We teach separately about them. We write about them a lot, but it is not at all how we connected. We've just been really lucky that our paths have unfolded along parallel lines since we first met, I think 8 or 9 years ago, we decided. So we talk about a lot of things in this episode, such as how myths and stories evolve over time, the big dream that Milla had that guided her to change her work in the world. I really love talking about dreams and hearing people's dreams, but only when they're like big dreams, important dreams that you're just riveted and fascinated when you're listening. So I promise you as the listener that I will not let people tell me boring dreams. You will not be bored listening to dream stories when those come up on this podcast, which they won't always do. We talk about the circuitous paths we take when finding ourselves. Milla talks about her wonderful theory that information always goes where it needs to in order to survive so that it can resurface later when it's needed. We talk, of course, about ancestral medicine and being indigenous to a place, about cultural appropriation as a symptom of spiritual longing, about mimetic expression online, about the trauma of the burning times, and a whole lot more. I mean, we really go all over the place here, and I love listening to Milla talk, and I am honored that I got to record her talking and that I get to share it with you now. So without further ado, let me plug you into our conversation. Okay, I am here with Milla Prince. Hi, Milla.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, Milla. So I've wanted to have this podcast for about 11 years, as I've already talked about, since 2006, but I got somewhat more serious about it in the spring of 2015, which is when I bought all the equipment that I'm using now. But now it's fall 2017 that I'm finally doing it. But back then I wanted Milla to be my first guest. And these 2.5 years, I've always thought, okay, when I finally do it, Milla will be my first guest. And she is, and she's here in person with me. It just so happened that when I finally got my shit together to do this, it's the same time that Milla's visiting me. So we are in the same room, staring into each other's eyes in a really intense way. And I thought we could open by talking about one of our medicine stories, our origin story, the story of how we met, because I think it's a delightful story. But I like the way you tell it, Milla. I like your phrase about the subculture.
So this is actually, we have another couple of friends that we met through the same way that we met each other. Our friend Missa was visiting me on the small island that I live on in Washington. We were at our one local bar, and a local friend of mine is like, after we play some pool and we're hanging out, and she's like, so how do you and Milla know each other? And my friend Missa like pauses for a long time, and she goes, well, in 2009, I think that's right.
Late 8, early 9.
Yeah, in 2009, we were part of the same internet subculture of women posting pictures of their vintage outfits on Flickr. And my friend was just like, that's a thing. And I was like, wow, you use such a different internet than I do. But so literally, I'm going to misuse that word just like everybody else. Amber and I originally met through the photo sharing app Flickr. I guess it wasn't an app at the time, actually. Yeah, like website. We're so old. We used websites on the interwebs. Where we met at this group called Wardrobe Remix, which was all about like people sharing thrifted and vintage outfits. And I think the remix part of it is that you like don't buy new clothes, you like remixed all of your groovy outfits from your wardrobe. And at the time, Amber had a vintage online Etsy store.
No, I didn't even yet. So that's the thing. I kind of had the same reaction that your friend in the bar did when I found Wardrobe Remix. And then like people would link to their blogs and their captions underneath their outfit photo. But I was like, people do this? Like you can just post your outfits online and anyone gives a shit. And you can have a whole blog about what you found at thrift stores. Like, I want to do that.
And it's kind of awesome. I like actually genuinely miss that part of the internet, which was just like non-commercial, super creative, and just like that was the first time where I felt like, oh, like you could be into these things, like into clothes and thrifting, and have like ordinary women that you looked up to and like were connected to, like could connect to, rather than like looking at fashion magazines and being like, oh, this isn't really even my style. It's also really funny. I don't know if you watched, like this is totally gonna be a tangent, but did you watch Girl Boss on Netflix?
No.
It's like from that era, and she like basically tries to make the gunny sack happen.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious because that's kind of a big part of our origin story is that then Amber did start at some point with Sasha. You guys started Violet Folklore, which was their online vintage store, and they were kind of like on the first wave of making the gunny sack dress happen, which if you don't know what that is, just Google it. Amber's picture comes up like pretty early in the Google still, I'm pretty sure. And it's just funny because I watched that and I was like, oh yeah, we were totally part of like making the gunny sack a thing.
Yeah. And that was like a lifetime ago now, right? It kind of was. And then Wardrobe Remix really quickly exploded and completely changed. Like it was no longer about what you thrifted or what vintage you were wearing. It became really different.
And it's interesting too because I feel like there is a lot of transitions like from that world into the herbal world. Like I have actually in teaching and going to like gatherings and conferences, I've met a bunch of like a handful of women who are like, I've been following you online since like Flickr.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, and we're both into herbalism and plant medicine and ancestral magic.
There's so many of us. I've made a list before of all the women who I met through vintage back then online who are now doing herbalism. And I still, like, I meet people who are herbalists and then they mention, oh yeah, and I also had this vintage shop back then. Like, oh, of course you did.
Yeah, like you know, like Sophia had one.
Yeah,
Sophia Rose. She was
yeah.
like in high school at that time. And I
Right.
was like, oh, there's this resonance between ladies who love fancy, funky, old school clothes and like plants.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Interesting.
I love that. And it was just, yeah, also like I feel like the whole evolution of the internet as a tool to like connect to like-minded people, there is this resonance in that where it was the first time where you were like, oh, I could have friends, like I maybe don't have friends who like resonate with this one aspect of my life that I'm really interested in, but there are all these people out there and they're also all looking for these resonances and wanting to connect and just being like, wow, like that felt really liberating and cool. And I know that like it's kind of a cliche now to make internet, like meet people online, like it's such a thing that people do. But part of why my friend Missa was so cringy about, and I still, when people ask me, I'm like, it's kind of a weird thing. Because it just wasn't a thing back then as much. Like now everybody meets their partner and boyfriend and like whomever online. But back then it was like, I have friends I made on the interwebs.
Yeah, well, and the first time we met in person in 2011, it was, yeah, I remember just like sitting across the table from both you and Missa being like, they're like celebrities, you know? When you know someone's face and you know their life story so well because you share really intimate writings with them through our blogspot blogs back then. Like I knew you, but I didn't know you and I hadn't met you before. And it was my first experience of meeting people I'd met online only. And it was, I was kind of just like shell-shocked almost, sitting there, not knowing what to say or how to act.
Yeah, our friend Heather was there too. It was kind of us four.
And me and Heather already knew each other IRL, and you and Missa knew each other.
And it was just this like moment of like, and it's also like, it was a really interesting lesson in how those resonances often do translate into real life. And that's been my experience over and over, whether it's like with herbal friends or people who are interested in something else that I'm interested in that you meet, where there is something about writing and deeply sharing online, even though it can feel like a superficial medium, especially now, where when you do meet that person in person, you're like, oh, I do know a part of you, and that part still resonates in real life. And I feel that is actually a kind of a cool medicine to take away from that, is that as much as anyone can pretend to be whatever they want online, when you're genuinely you and share genuine parts of you, that does translate to real life.
Yeah, you talked about that before on the medicine of social media, and I really loved that. I feel like so many people want to just get down on it, or like they love it and they're addicted to it, but then they feel like they have to be like, oh, you know, so lame. It's not real. But like, it's so real. And we're sitting here together right now because of the reality of the connection that we made.
Totally. And I think we've known each other for like almost 9 years, I think.
Yeah.
I tried to do the math and it feels like forever, but that's some of my like longer friendships that aren't like from like high school or childhood.
Right.
And that makes it feel really real too.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned Violet Folklore, and I'm thinking about that name now. And the reason that we had chose that name was because Violet could invoke an image of like an older woman who'd have these cool vintage clothes, and it's also one of my favorite medicinal plants. And then folklore is like stories and story medicine. And it's interesting how those things are still carried through in what I'm doing today. And it makes me think about the names that we go by online and the stories behind our names. And so I wanted to ask you today about the name The Woman Who Married a Bear. I think you're the only person that I know, I'm sure there are others, who like your online handle, that's your website and that's your Instagram name, is the name of a myth. So can you tell us about that?
And I think originally, when I chose it, so part of how I ended up like having this whole online life was that I had just gotten married to my American husband. We were in the process of immigration. So he was in the US and I was back in Finland, where I'm from. And I was trying to write my bachelor's thesis, which meant that I spent a lot of time on the computer. And I was basically sort of trying to do whatever it took to not write my bachelor's thesis. And I was also kind of in this bind a little bit where like I the immigration process ended up taking a really long time. We didn't see each other for the first year that we were married, which was really, really hard because in my real life, like, one, I couldn't make any permanent like decisions. Like, I couldn't apply for jobs because I could have left at any moment. I was kind of just in this holding pattern. And also I had like everybody in my life just like every day would ask me about it. And when there's like something really painful and hard in your life, like, you don't constantly want to be reminded of it. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time online avoiding my bachelor's thesis. And it was the same thing like what you were talking about. I was like, oh, like, you can write things online, you can just write whatever and people just do it. And like, it was this total like funny thing where I found Blogspot and I was like, you can just like make zines, because I've always actually been a zine maker. I was a zine maker in junior high and high school and in my 20s. And at this point, I think I was 29. And I hadn't made any zines for, I think, at least like 4 or 5 years. And I was like, oh, like, you can have an online zine. And it's kind of this like fun secret where like it's just out there on the internet and it's super public, but also someone has to be able to find it. And so I kind of on a whim started this blog, and I was like trying to come up with a name. And at the time, I also feel like people's online handles were crazier and longer. Like, now everyone's so into branding and like coming up with like everything's the same. Like, for instance, like my website and my Instagram handle and my other online handles are not the name of my business, which is Fireweed and Nettle, which is not something that you would do now if you started. Like, everything would be the same. But at the time, there was this freedom in it where you could just pick whatever resonated with you. And I picked The Woman Who Married a Bear because it's a story that is like a deep part of my people's mythology. Bear is actually one of our ancestors. The myth of that story has to do with how the bear is the son of one of our main gods or deities, and he gets lowered in the Big Dipper onto the earth, but then he goes on to sort of become our ancestor by marrying this human woman and creating this group of people, which is always indigenous people. Always when you translate their name, it's the people, right? And so the people whom I come from are the people of the bear. And he is, and I'm not going to tell you the story, but you can definitely look it up. But the basics of it are that a bear seduces a human woman, and they have cubs, these half human, half bear beings, who are then my people's ancestors. And I picked that myth not just because it was deeply resonant to my people, but because I was moving to where I now live, which is the coast of Washington, northwest coast of Washington. I live on a small island in the Salish Sea on unceded Coast Salish territory. So the land of the Coast Salish people. And further up north, on both the Canadian and the Alaskan coastline, that story is the story that belongs to indigenous people there. And there was this interesting resonance where I remember first reading that story and being like, how is this the same story the world over? And even though I wasn't like thinking about it super deeply, I was like literally just like naming my internet weblog. I was like, there's something here. And then also my husband, Charlie, has always, ever since he was pretty young, people have told him that he is a bear. And he totally is. He looks like one. He acts like one. Like, he'll like scratch himself on trees the way you see bears doing. And you're just like, you're such a bear. And you know, like, some people have animal resonances where you're like, oh, you kind of seem like this animal or that animal, but it's really, really strong with him. So it just kind of stuck with me, and I've never really felt the need to change it. I think originally it was the girl who married a bear, and then I think I changed it like a couple years ago, and I was like, I'm not really a girl anymore. Like, that seems weird.
Yeah, you grew up.
I grew up a little bit. I mean, yeah. I was 29. I should have probably like started with that. But yeah, that is the story of my online handles. And now it's really long. So like when I tell people what my Instagram name, I'm like, it's The Woman Who Married a Bear. And people are like, the what now? And like, whatever, just look it up.
Yeah, and I remember, reading that that's really a pan-Arctic story. That it is sort of across the northern lands on this globe. There is this deep bear medicine and bear mythology, and that story comes up in a lot of cultures.
Well, and if you look at a map of what is the Arctic and the subarctic, like if you look at it from above, you could look at something like the Aleutic Islands from Russia and to what is now US Alaska. And it seems like really far away from like the Finnish Arctic and subarctic, but if you look at it from above, they're actually like as land masses, and when they were connected by ice, which, you know, there's a lot of theories on that, but they're actually really close to each other. And they're we have this idea of culture, old cultures being static, that people just kind of sat around in one place and married their cousin over and over, when in reality people have always traveled and moved, but at a different pace. So it totally makes sense that there are these resonances between cultures that have, according to the all-knowing and all-powerful feeling white men who are archaeologists, basically, they hold this lens that everything is separate, and that's not necessarily true. Like, some of the oldest connections between cultures in the world are stories, because stories got passed on from generations and generations in oral traditions, and sometimes that's all that remains, even when genetic traces are no longer entirely discernible. And I think that that's a really cool testament to that. And bear lore is so potent and exists in so many cultures, and I've always been fascinated by that because of my people having those stories and growing up with those stories. And it's always this little treat to kind of find a piece of bear lore in a completely different context, like the Ainu, for instance, in Japan, who are the bear people there, and just being like, oh, there's this resonance, and then you have like anthropologists, you know, all of these people who think they know everything and need to classify and categorize everything, say that there is no genetic resonance. And it's like, it doesn't really matter if there's a genetic resonance, like there is a resonance of story that exists, and that's like proof enough that there's a connection.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend a book to anyone who's in resonance with bear, and it's called Giving Voice to Bear. There's some beautiful photos, like a really old photo of the Ainu people, or it's two men, I think maybe three men. It's just, oh, that photo is so powerful and meaningful. So I also wanted to ask you about a dream that you had that has been really guiding for you, and it brings in another mythic element that I know is important in your life, and that is your Baba Yaga's house dream. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so gosh, I think it's now like 3.5 years ago, maybe. So I grew up with a lot of fairy tales. My mom is a really interesting and formative person for me, and she had all these ideas about like what she wanted for me, I guess, in life. One of which was that for some reason, even though she's not one, she wanted me to be a prolific reader. And my mom is a single mom, there wasn't any other, I mean, there was my grandmother and my aunt and all these other caregivers, but I never had a dad. So she was really on her own in a lot of ways. And she decided kind of early on, I think this is the thing that happens a lot with like single guardians of children, that she didn't want to read like kids' chapbooks, like books for little babies that are about like, you know, like Lisa goes to the doctor. Like she was like, you know, fuck that.
Or like the book that you were looking at my house yesterday, Relativity for Babies.
Relativity for Babies, I think she could have gotten into. Like, she did have this dream that I was going to become a math genius, which she did not pan out. Like, she tried to teach me how to play chess, and turns out I have no affinity for that. But she started really early on reading books to me that were interesting to her. Like, she read me the entire Lord of the Rings series, which I'm sure because you've read Harry Potter to your daughter, Maisie, you can imagine reading. I think Harry Potter might actually be thicker now than...
Oh, there's 7 of those books, and the last few are giant.
Yeah. So it took her, like, she started reading The Lord of the Rings to me when I was 2.5, and I think we were done with it when I was 4.5.
That's so cute.
Which is pretty crazy, and it's pretty advanced language for a little kid. But yeah, she made this kind of conscious decision that she wanted me to be a reader, and she wanted to encourage that. And also that she wasn't going to read anything that wasn't interesting to her, at least on some level. So she read me a lot of fairy tales. And a lot of the ones that I really loved were Russian fairy tales. Finland was at one point occupied by the Russians for a long time. We've had a border with them for a long time. And those Finno-Ugric and Slavic cultures very much intermingle, like the stories exist in the same spaces. And are told by the same people in different ways. There wasn't so much separation between those cultures back in the old days. So it often feels like some of those stories are our stories as well. And one of my favorites, like that I remember even as a little kid, was in English, I think it's the story of Vasilisa the Beautiful, but in all other languages, it's Vasilisa the Wise, which gives you some idea of how we think of girls and women, because the heroine is this young girl, Vasilisa, who's wicked stepmother, which I teach about this a lot. Like, wouldn't it be nice if like all fairy tales weren't about woman on woman crime, where wicked stepmothers who are witches often, or like in this case, her sort of wicked stepmother sends her to complete this impossible mission. She basically sends her to the house of this witch, Baba Yaga. Baba means grandmother or elder lady in Russian and in a lot of other Slavic languages. And so her stepmother sent her to this house, and she, through her wits and her luck and this magical doll that she has, she wins over this witch Baba Yaga. And that was always my favorite story. And one of the things that I early on realized that it differentiated from like the classic fairy tales of the Grimm brothers, which are really kind of colonized versions of old myths, was that Baba Yaga from story to story varied. Like, she was neither good nor bad. She was very unpredictable. So she was good for some folks and terrible for others. She ate people. But she was also like, for a lot of the heroes and heroines of those stories, she was this guiding, wise old crone who gave them advice and made good things happening possible for them. And so I always resonated that. In fact, when I was in 5th grade, I directed a play with all of my classmates in which I played Baba Yaga. I was a version of Vasilisa the Wise, and the pretty blonde girl in my class got to play Vasilisa. And I actually feel like that was a pattern throughout my childhood. I always got to play the witch because I was very dark-haired and dark-skinned, and somehow that like translated to me being the witch in every play, which I remember being kind of bitter about, but also being kind of into at the same time. And so I've always been interested in Baba Yaga lore and been sort of an amateur folklorist in that I've studied that topic and read up on it, and been collecting books about Slavic and Finno-Ugric folk tales. And about 3.5 years ago, I had this dream, and it's actually a dream in a series of dreams that I had but had never connected. And in all of these dreams, there's these similar themes of I'm in the woods and I'm moving along this path. And every dream there's a challenge, and I have to complete it by basically doing magic, like moving things with my words and with my thoughts and with my body without touching them. But in this dream, I'm speeding along this forest path and I'm like moving all these obstacles, and there's all these shadows in the periphery of my vision. And in all these dreams, things are hard, but I always also feel very much in power, and I'm always flying. And flight dreams, if you look into dream lore, are really potent dreams about your subconscious, depending on how you interpret them, about your actual power and your freedom. And at the end of the dream, I come to this clearing, and there's this house there. And it's this house that's all lit up from the inside. And you can see the little curl of white smoke going up to the starry night sky. It's this very picturesque, perfect picture. And the house stands on chicken legs, which is how Baba Yaga's house is in tales. And in the dream, I'm like, oh, it's Baba Yaga's house, because Baba Yaga is an old familiar of mine, somebody who I know very well. And so I'm like, okay, so I guess I'm going to go in. And I get on the porch. I feel like I kind of jump on it or fly onto it. And I sort of knock on the door, and I'm about to enter when suddenly I'm shot up into the night sky, and I'm not flying by myself. I'm being pushed up, and I'm floating upwards from this clearing into the starry night sky. And I hear this deep booming voice that says, first, you must call yourself a witch. And then I woke up. And I was like, okay, that seems very clear. So I'm not allowed to go into the house until I call myself a witch. And I did some reflecting on that. And that's sort of when a lot of like the work that I'm doing now came into focus, where I was like, okay, I guess I am a witch. And I guess I often tell people that that wasn't a moment that I decided that I was a witch. It was sort of a moment where I remembered that I'd always been a witch, which was something that I find over and over when I teach people is very clear to a lot of us in childhood. And then you discover that it doesn't sort of jibe with, you become like into that, you get into that preteen years of like, where suddenly you're being treated more like an adult. And you get told that doesn't really jibe with how the world works, and that you're no longer a child and you should let go of the dreams and fairy tales and magic and medicine of childhood. and you start doubting yourself. Like, that's also that there's this precious moment where women and girls, and I think all children, but particularly women and girls, because it's so hard for us to grow up in this society, feel very powerful. And then you'll see them just a few years later and they're conforming very much to the dominant society's idea of how you should be.
I recently read about this. It happens between 9 and 11 in American society, almost without fail.
And I think that's also, it's a little bit earlier now than when we were kids. Like, I feel like 11 and 12 was that magic zone before 13, which was the kind of the teenage years. And I think it's just because we are now our children are being asked to grow up so much earlier now. So I think that line too of like feeling empowered and confident and in your own truth and power has moved backwards. And it's everything from like, yeah, sure, some women and girls might feel like they're witches, others might just feel like that they're, you know, really good at things that are considered in the male dominion or like really powerful in their bodies, and then society can just knock them down. And I think that in that moment, for myself at least, I kind of was like, oh, like this isn't a thing that anyone is, so how could I be that?
Mm-hmm. And so did the dream, did it feel like those were Baba Yaga's words that she said that to you?
That's how I interpreted it. And having had like a long relationship with that, and I want to say deity because she is sort of this deity transformed. A lot of our old spirits and deities and medicine ways and magics are transformed into fairy tales now. That's the way that they can survive. And one of my theories is that information always goes where it needs to go in order for it to survive so that it can resurface. And so that's how I've felt about it. And I've pursued on going on that path and proliferating that word and proliferating her story. And it is actually really interesting because I feel like 10 years ago, like I could be in a room with a bunch of people, even people who are interested in folklore, and speak about Baba Yaga, and no one would really know who she was unless they were of like Slavic or Ugric origin. And now I feel like she's everywhere. Like I'm excited to get my copy of it. Someone just published a book, and I wish I remembered this person's name. We'll put it in show notes if we find it. But someone just published a book on advice column letters to Baba Yaga, where people write in things like, "Dear Baba Yaga, I'm dating this man and he doesn't want to commit. What should I do?" And then she gives advice as Baba Yaga.
Wow.
And I just hear it a lot more. And I had the privilege of meeting Eve Bradford and Rachel Buddy at Spirit Weavers and talking Baba Yaga lore with them. And publishing in my zine, in the Cauldron, Eve's poem, An Open Letter to Baba Yaga, which I recommend so highly. And every time the topic comes up, there's all these people who are like coming at it and being like, Baba Yaga. And I feel like she sort of, the way that Eve put it is that there's this set of instructions that is coming out of like, she is a perfect deity for this era, this moment of people kind of coming back and reclaiming that word witch. And I followed her instructions. I've had other ones of those dreams, but I haven't gone into the house yet. So I feel like my work here is not done yet.
I was going to ask that, but then I had the thought that like the dream world doesn't always work like that. You might not make it into the house, or something else altogether might happen, but do keep us updated.
I will. And Eve said another thing that was really interesting that really made me think when I told her that dream, which is that when I decided that I wasn't going to be a witch anymore, it wasn't a conscious decision. It is something that, it's not like, you know, girls decide that they can't, you know, do the things that their society tells them not to do. It's more a subconscious thing. But the way that she put it, or I put it in that conversation, I don't remember whom, but it was in that conversation, was that all roads lead to Baba Yaga's house, which is that then I put my energy into all these other things. I went to film school, I became an artist, I became an environmental activist, I taught fertility awareness and women's womb care and self-care and all these different things. And all of those strands were just me putting that energy into something else. But eventually, if you're meant to go somewhere, you're going to end up there. And sometimes people just take more circuitous roads because they don't quite know how to, or like in my case, sort of feel afraid of going to the place you're actually supposed to go. Mm-hmm. And I really like that. Like, I like knowing that you can't miss your station stop, even if you don't actually get off at the right stop. Like, the train will eventually come back around.
And if you're following a path that's in resonance with your heart and your soul and the story that was seated in your soul at birth, Yeah, like you said, when you get to the end, not that there's the end, but to a really big moment like that, like reclaiming Baba Yaga, you will see that it was all leading there all along, and you will see how each little interest and divergence on the path was actually part of the whole.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
I interrupted you. Were you saying something else before I asked that question?
No, I think that that's just also a really good point, is that sometimes in order to help other people on their path, it is good to take that longer route, because then you know that things don't come easy, and sometimes it's helpful for people, like when I'm sharing information, it's helpful to be like, I didn't always used to do this, and I didn't figure this out right away, rather than being someone who's like, I always knew this and I've always done this, because in this world it's actually really hard to figure out what you're meant to do here, because the dominant society has really really concrete ideas about who we're supposed to be, and we're all sort of supposed to do the same thing.
So how did that then, you hinted at this, how did it change your work in the world? How did it shift what you were focusing on and what you were sharing? And what are you teaching now that's in line with what came through for you in that dream?
Well, for one thing, I kind of realized that being a witch is the perfect umbrella term for a lot of things that I was already doing. There isn't really, like, I have always been a kind of a militant dilettante, which is that I'm really interested in a lot of different things. And there hadn't ever really been something where I could be like, oh, this is the umbrella term for everything that I do for environmental activism and community organizing, and for making art and writing and creating plant medicine and sharing all of that information in different ways with people. And that word, I was like, oh, all of this is part of my medicine as a witch, is part of my craft. But it did change. It shifted a few things for me, in the sense that I felt like I had a clear mission to connect other people to their own, particularly people, and I think this is just a combination of being an immigrant. So I had the privilege of immigrating to the United States. I married an American, and we decided that we were going to live in this very specific place, the island that I live on. It's a big part of our relationship, and it was a big part of why we wanted to particularly live in the US together. And also, obviously, that I spoke English and my husband doesn't speak Finnish, which is one of the hardest languages on earth to learn, if you're not a native speaker. But that process of immigrating, and coming to a different bioregion, and coming to a culture that was not the culture that I was born and raised in, and living on land that wasn't my land, and that land that I wasn't invited to live on, and my people hadn't lived on for thousands of years, shifted my perspective on something that I had taken for granted for a long time, which is having that indigenous knowledge of a place and its plants and its history, and feeling like one belongs to it. And I actually have this like crazy memory. So I started sharing plant medicine more. I have this ancestral medicine practice that's kind of been a big part of my life for all of my life, but at the same time has been really ambient, where I was just like, like in spring, my mom and I would go get nettles and cook with them. And that's just something that you do. And like you dry some of them with tea, and it's like not like a big deal or anything. It's just something that everybody does. But I started sharing plant medicine more with a wider audience of people, and getting more and more feedback from people online and in people that I met and in my community. And I have this moment, like I have a memory of calling you and being like, we should like teach people about their own ancestral plant medicine, and you being like, yes, because we'd had all these interesting conversations, and you'd written all these interesting pieces about your own ancestry and your path with your ancestry, and learning about your ancestors and the medicine that they bring into your practices. And I was getting bombarded with all these questions from people, and feeling like people were asking for permission to start on their plant path. And I was like, I have to talk to Amber. Like, it was another one of those moments, like literally it felt like a set of instructions coming in, where it's like, I have to talk to Amber about this. Like, she has all this information about that. We have to kind of like collaborate and do something with this. And so I feel like that was a big part of that transformation for me, just kind of opening up those practices from my perspective. and talking to people, specifically people with European settler ancestry here, about how they too have this birthright to all these practices that in some ways are indigenous practices the world over, but moreover that they belong to everybody, and that in order to reclaim them and decolonize their own history with plant medicine and land-based spirituality, they can become allies to the land that they now occupy that isn't always their land. And even if it is, even if some part of one is native to Turtle Island, to the Americas, there's often settler ancestry in there, and how to reconcile that. And so I feel like that alone, and speaking to that word witches, there's always, like, that's all, like, still, I'm such a cheese ball, like, that still cracks me up. I'm like, haha, that's hilarious.
Wait, which?
But the etymology of that word speaks so deeply to how it is the oldest land-based tradition, indigenous tradition, that people with European ancestry and people everywhere have access to. But particularly in that European ancestry, that word witch really does resonate with that. And I feel like that was sort of the message from Baba Yaga. And I feel like sharing that information and putting those pieces together in this cohesive way has really shifted my perspective on what I'm doing. And you were a huge part of it, because you were kind of the only person that I knew who was connecting their own ancestry to their plant medicine practice, and sharing those practices side by side, openly, and like writing about it and speaking to it. So I just remember kind of being like, I'm going to call Amber and we're going to talk about it. And then once we talked, it was just like, it all clicked together, and we were like, oh, like, this is something we should do.
Yeah. And I remember, this was like 2 years ago that we had that initial conversation, thinking that, like, we were really onto something, you know, like, and we were, but that we had this very original idea, which is that we're all really seeking deeper connection with the land, with the plants, and with our ancestors. And that this is a big part of the reason we see so much cultural appropriation and just confusion in people who are ready to, like, hook into any spiritual tradition or intact tradition that they find interesting. And we wanted to empower people, like, there's going to be more power for you in your own ancestral traditions. But what I've noticed in the last few months or years, that a lot of people have realized the same thing that I thought we were really original in realizing a couple years ago. And a lot of the teachers that I'm listening to, reading their words, listening to them talk, are saying the exact same thing. So I think it's really part of this paradigm shift in the culture, in the people who are paying attention, that there's going to be more for them in their own ancestral line than there is in the line of someone else's. And sometimes we do resonate with a culture that's far outside our own, but that also makes me want to ask you about the paradigm shifts you've seen around the word witch, because to tell you the truth, I still have a little bit of a, like, cringy reaction to it. Maybe not cringy, but I'm afraid people are going to make fun of me for using it. And I can picture the specific people in my life who I'm like, oh, I'm sure she rolls her eyes every time she sees me use that word on Instagram. And I think about, like, people I knew back in the early 2000s when I was in my 20s who were like, I'm a witch. Like, no, you're not. You're just, like, wearing black and you have a couple candles in your room. Like, so I've accepted it more and more and more, but it's still, I have a hard time letting go of all these old ideas and fears, maybe, about how I'll be perceived for using it.
Well, and it's a really interesting conversation. For one thing, it's interesting because I feel like our culture moves so fast now that there's already a backlash to that, where people are like, oh my god, #witch. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like, it's interesting, I was talking to a friend online actually who was saying, like, oh, Instagram has, like, ruined all these words and concepts for me, like ancestry and medicine. And I was like, well, one thing, definitely if you're in this particular niche of work that we're in, there is this resonance. And, like, one of the things, and you're going to have to interrupt me if I drift too far, because this is kind of how my brain works, but, like, mimetic expression, like memes, before memes were, like, about cute cats, which I'm all for and fully endorse. Meme was actually this word that mostly people were interested in linguistics and language used, and it's a delivery method for ideas, right? That's what a meme is. Like, mimetic expression is like when some information, it comes from like, probably from our ape brain, really, where like we needed to pass on information. And it is also partially maybe at the root of similar inventions being made in different places at the same time, which is that someone came up with an idea and then it traveled like wildfire through all these little hunter-gatherer communities, or like communities of any kind, like communities of weavers, communities of sailors, communities of wherever, where, you know, all of a sudden this idea pops up and people start hearing about it.
You mean even when there is not direct communication?
Well, that's definitely a possibility of that, but also just like as like you know, somebody comes up with an idea and it travels really fast because it's a good idea, and it can be expressed concisely, and that's kind of what a meme is. So I feel like that particular word, because it is connected to that old land-based cultural tradition, and there is like, it's not an intact line, but there is this direct line that I love, you know, to the witchcraft practices that we now know of and that have survived all the way to the 21st century through different means. And some of them are really ordinary means of like weaving and like broom making and all these different, and plant medicine, all these different creations, but they survived from the cradle of humanity, from the upper Paleolithic, that we are actually the direct inheritors of practices and plant medicine and all these different things from like a really long time ago. And I feel like that's part of why that word is coming up so much, because you're right, there is this resonance right now. People are really feeling that disconnect that our society creates from what we call nature, which is a very colonial concept. Like, nature is not different from humans. Our culture is really good at creating divisions between this is a this and that is a that, and they don't meet in the middle. But there is this yearning for connection. That's something that you and I noticed and spoke of in that initial conversation, where it almost felt like people are writing to us to ask for permission to be interested in plants, which feels so silly and basic because it is everybody's birthright to be healed with plants and to have a relationship with plants. And then, so that's one side of it. Like, I feel like it's just a word that we use for that connection, and that you don't have to use that word, but it is the word that is coming up. And that's why #witch is trending, because it's a powerful mimetic idea that has survived and been resilient for a really, really long time. And it has not been wiped out in spite of the express desires of a dominant society, of whatever we want to call it, the empire, the patriarchy. Capitalism is this latest iteration of male power not being above feminine power, rather than the two being in balance, which that sounds like a 90s concept that I never wanted to speak to, but there we are. And so on the one hand, yeah, like, you know, I definitely participated in some Wiccan covens, and I'm not throwing any shade on Wiccan covens. I just want to say that's not the only way to practice being a witch. It's not the only legitimate witchcraft practice that exists.
Yeah, can we make clear that Wicca is a religion that was invented?
Or invented, or like came from those traditions. It's a distillation of those traditions and recreation of some of those myths. And
yeah, but it was like a specific
practices.
Man who was like, okay, I'm like gonna codify these ideas and make this a new thing and name it Wicca.
And Wicca is actually the male form of that original Germanic and Celtic word, right? So it's the Anglo-Saxon word of that is, I'm confusing two things, sorry, but that is the male form of it. It's not actually female. So, oh my gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. That sometimes happens. There's more than one way to practice witchcraft. But also just like that. So like, I have those old ideas too of like, I was in a Wiccan coven in the early 2000s. I definitely spent some, like, my favorite part of it was, I was living in England, and my favorite part of it was hanging out with English head witch grandmas and doing women's circles, and like the actual rituals of it were totally cringy to me. And it's not, again, no shade thrown onto those people at all. Like, they were embracing their truth and living their spiritual life, and it just wasn't for me. So there's that, but for me, and then there's like, yeah, definitely I'm seeing people, like, I am part of proliferating that word, particularly online. I feel proud of that. And like, I'm seeing people slap it onto their products and being like, #witch, super dreamy, I'm witchy now too. Or like same thing with ancestry, of people just being like ancestral everything. And my reaction to that backlash in particular, I had somebody bring that up in class and I'm like, you know what? It's not that long ago that using that word could get you into real trouble. Like into real serious trouble. Like it's not that long ago. And there are still places in the world actually where using those words can get people in trouble. Saying that you're a witch in certain parts of Africa, like there are actually people killing people who are perceived as witches, whether they're doing anything in that realm or not. And in other parts of the world too. And that's a very real thing. Like a big part of reclaiming that word for me is that we all also carry out, like if you do have indigenous European ancestry, you carry a lot of trauma around the burning times, around the eradication of that female power. And just because it became a hashtag trend doesn't erase the fact that we still need to address that power. And that's kind of what I mean about like our culture moving so fast that like something's passé before it's even entered the dominant stream. And like, you know, maybe there's a bunch of people who are attaching it to their products and candles now and they won't in 2 years, but I think I'm still going to call myself a witch. Because there's power in that word. There is power in words. And I say witch in English because that's what I was told to do, and that this is where my work is. But I actually use the word noita, which in Finnish is very similar to the word that would be used of like it encompasses more than just the idea of the fairy tale witch or somebody who has a bubbling cauldron or somebody who even lives in the hedge of the village. It's actually the word that we use for shaman. And while there's a lot of connotations with that as well, it's that not so much that someone who is a witch claims to be a shaman, but that you can have shamanic practices, which witchcraft as we know it throughout the Middle Ages and on into where some of those practices were codified into Wicca those are universal practices that have existed in cultures the world over. And I think that there's power in that word, and there's power in determining, like I have a class that I teach called Be Your Own Witch, which is like just figure out what it is that you need to do with that. And you don't have to use that word, but there's something in there that is rising that it mimetically makes sense to people right now. And I feel like the more people use it, the safer it is for us to use it. And, you know, yeah, there's going to be a lot of hashtag witches, but I would rather there were hashtag witches and there were people like something like Ancestry when like a couple years ago was totally not trending. Like when I first read you writing about your deep ancestry, like, yeah, this year everybody's doing 23andMe, but like 5 years ago when you wrote that article, I was like, oh, you can do genetic testing for your deep ancestry. Oh, Amber's like recommending this book called The 7 Daughters of Eve. Like that's really interesting and weird, and I'd not ever heard of it. And I love that it's trending. Like, yeah, it's annoying to be like, oh, like everybody's doing something, but it's also cool because that's a really important thing that no one's paid attention to for a long time.
Yeah, that makes me sad to hear you say that some people are reacting against the word ancestors or ancestry. And actually, I remember years ago, it was the first time we met, one of the friends we were with, she was like, oh yeah, my husband said that he can't ever imagine using the word ancestors. And I was like, whoa, so struck by that, you know? I was like, but he has hundreds of thousands of ancestors who live in his body and affect him here today. And like, that made me really sad that he was just like, oh, already back then, already in his mind, it was like, this is some like superficial trend that has nothing to do with my life. And I always think about, and I always quote Meryl Streep when I saw her on one of those genealogy TV shows say, we are nothing but them. So if people are turning away from the idea of ancestry because it's trendy, that brings me sadness.
But that's what I mean also, like when something becomes a meme or a mimetic expression, like, yeah, there's always a backlash against it. And I actually honestly think that is also a healthy, there's always an antidote to everything in case the mimetic expression doesn't end up working for the populace. And this might be sort of, I have a tendency to, on the one hand, like, I have this tendency of like kind of like reason-splaining my spirituality so I can feel comfortable with it, because for so long I didn't feel comfortable with it. Yeah. But I think that there is something to that where when something is really powerful and popular, there is something to stepping into that and examining it for yourself. And some people are going to be like, oh, I'm not into that. And they're sort of the antidote against bad ideas, or they're the devil's advocate, and that's a necessary role for people to play. But also, yeah, don't be against something just because it's trendy. Because before you examine it, because something like ancestry, like, yeah, I love that we live in a bubble where that is a buzzword right now, because it's important and it resonates with people. And every time I teach classes and I talk about this idea that you can be the inheritor of a tradition that goes back to, the upper Paleolithic, like tens of thousands of years back, it makes people feel something really deep, and it makes people feel connected in this world where we feel so disconnected from everything, and we don't feel claimed by anyone, like a lot of us, and especially here on Turtle Island in North America, a lot of people are like, where do I even come from? Like, I remember having a conversation with my husband, who actually then, like, once we talked about it, like, he like has what is actually considered indigenous ancestry. He's part Finnish and he's part Sami, which is like considered indigenous in the way that we use the word indigenous, specifically people who have this pretty unintact culture and are also being pressed by a dominant society and don't have a nation state. But like, I remember him being like, what am I supposed to do? Just be white? And I was like, I'm insulted by that. Like, I come from a culture that is considered, I mean, Finland is it's not a perfect state. We literally are kind of the whitest nation on earth in some ways, save for Icelanders. And thankfully that's changing and there's more diversity. But I was like, also, like, we have this amazing cultural heritage. And by saying that, you're denouncing your ancestry in this amazing cultural tradition, let alone your own indigenous tradition. And you should, learn it and speak to it and be proud of it and discover it and not just dismiss it as something that's uninteresting or uncool.
Well, that sounds a lot like how I felt for a very long time, especially when I first started feeling the pull of my ancestors, and that's really the only way I can describe it. I didn't know anyone else who was into it, but I just got this very strong message in like the summer of 2010, find your ancestors, like, go get them now. And one of the things I did was drove down to where all the older members of my family live and interview them, knowing they would die soon, and they have all passed now. So I'm so glad I did that. But the feeling I had was, I was like, I'm just a white girl. That's all. There's nothing, I'm not going to find anything interesting. And then, of course, the further back I go, the more I do find interesting things, including just the white people, the like Southerners who live such different lives than I live. But something that you and I talk about when we open our ancestral herbalism classes is that I am that American mutt who has all these diverging lines that take me all over Europe. And a lot of them are really far back. A lot of my people, especially on my dad's side, have been in America for a really long time. But you have this extremely strong and clear ancestry on your mom's side, which is Finnish. And then can you talk a little bit about your dad's side?
Yeah, so on my mom's side, I mean, definitely, again, like, ancient peoples or peoples from other times before airplane travel were not static. Like, there's all these different lines always, but because transitions were shorter, a lot of my lines are particularly in Finland or in like the surrounding area, Russia and Scandinavia. And, like, I do make a lot of jokes about how inbred all of my ancestors were. And I married a guy whose mom is 3/4 Finnish, I think. And I make jokes about that because our genetics are just like, get together with someone who is like not too different from you so that we can keep inbreeding, keep these good genetics going, which Finns actually have a lot of health problems because of our gene pool. It's legal to marry your first cousin, just FYI. I know, it's super weird. Anyways. And then on one side, yeah, like, I come from people who have lived on that land and been land-based people there, which is the definition of indigenosity, is being of a particular land base and knowing that well and belonging to it, for generations upon generations that are traceable and can be easily found. And then on my father's side, and I always feel the urge to say biological father, even though I don't actually have any other kind of fathers, because I literally have no connection beyond felt connection and research connection to my father's culture. My mom raised me by herself, but my biological father the man I got half my genes from, is Palestinian, which is a really interesting concept to think about because Palestinians are now sort of landless people. And we're always nomadic. There is a lot of geopolitics in there. I was just talking to my husband and I was like, I'm a direct product of like, which we all are, but like more directly in the last few years, I'm like, I'm a direct product of like colonial policy. I exist because of this oppression of these particular people, which forced my father to be at a particular place at a particular time so that I could be conceived and born. And isn't that interesting? Like, thanks, geopolitics. But part of when we teach our ancestral herbalism and folk medicine classes, I feel really honored that I get to offer the fact that like eventually everybody's line goes dark. Even if you come from a really inbred culture that has 1,000 years of records, like I do on my one side, eventually there will be missed connections and the link gets severed. And that there are other ways which we address that you can pursue that. And a lot of it is research and genealogy or just research into particular bioregions that your last known ancestor comes from. But a lot of it is also just spirit work where you can connect through other means and feel it out. And so I've never had the opportunity or the means to really research how to find my father or my father's line. And I've gone through this long process of severing that in the sense that I no longer hold hope that I can find that, which if any of you listening happen to be people who have that in their lives, are adopted or have an adopted parent whose line is closed, or have a parent who is an absentee, that's a special pain that you have to deal with. Your family is always sort of a special pain and it manifests in different ways. But that's something that a lot of us really have to do work around, because the absolute fantasy of every child with a missing parent is that the parent will someday arrive with all these magic gifts of belonging and love and meaning. And to give that up is a really intense process. And it's really interesting. I'm still kind of working through that. I always cry when I talk about it in class, which is really hard. And then other people cry and there's this big crying fest.
I was just going to say, you're definitely making people cry right now.
But recently, through this work that we've been doing and just me kind of trying to figure things out, because for a long time I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll cross that bridge when I have children and I have to explain to them all these things. And then now that's probably not going to be a part of my life. I'm not probably going to have biological children of my own by choice. And I kind of feel like, okay, well, it's now my work to grapple with that, because I'm not going to have this like future plan for like how I'm going to work with that line. And it's been really wonderful. Like, yeah, part of it is geopolitics. Like, part of it is just me being interested in what that culture even is. And like little things like realizing that a lot of Palestinian people once were nomadic and that Palestine wasn't this like steady state, nation state the way we think about it. Doesn't mean that Palestinian people don't have their right to their own land or the right to be on land. That's everybody's right. And they are like, it's really hard for me to say our people, because I am not, like, I also have a fair amount of survivor's guilt from even like childhood of knowing that it was an area of, often being war torn, and also just that the people that I came from suffered this intense oppression and kind of feeling like, oh, didn't I get lucky to get out of that? And like seeing stuff in news, seeing children my age and being like, that could be me, and having that kind of guilt of like, oh my God, I live in the safest place on earth and most of my people do not. But as I started working with that, I discovered that the geopolitics is not enough, and even like cultural understanding is not enough. And it's also really interesting to discover where there are resonances. Because when we speak of resonances, what we mean is like you see something and it jibes with you. Like I've always had that with Japanese culture. I have always been, ever since a little kid, I've been crazy about Japanese culture. I don't know what that is. I don't know that comes from any particular place. I've just always been interested in it and I can't explain it. And it doesn't mean I'm going to like appropriate any of that culture, but I'm definitely like continuously reading up on it and like loving the idea of going there and exploring the animistic traditions and like seeing all these places, and have a lot of like weird knowledge about Japan that, you know, I like to bust out randomly. And that's what we kind of mean about resonances. Like sometimes you find things and you're just like, I know about that and I'm just going to have to relearn the things about that. And that's sometimes how you kind of know the truth. Like know the truth by the way it feels was something that my friend Kailea Sonresa shared about, something that we were talking about. And I love that. Like, you know the truth by the way it feels. Like, you know something is real by the way you feel it. And it's interesting to explore that when you know that you have a connection to a culture, but I have none of the culture. I have none of the Palestinian culture. But every once in a while something will happen. Like, I'll hear somebody speaking Arabic, and it's specific Arabic, and I'll just like, and often, especially in shamanic work, my teacher and friend Asia Suler talked to me a lot about it this fall. Just like one of the ways that you know something is real, you start crying. And it isn't like, oh, I'm ever so sad. It's a literal physical reaction where and I know you and I have talked about that with your mom passing, and sometimes things just overcome you. And you're like, I can't believe I'm crying right now at this, like Arabic market where I went into to buy dates and halwa, which are some of my favorite things to eat. And you're just like, oh my God, it's happening. Why is it happening to me right now? And that's somehow how you know that something is real. And it's been really interesting. I'm still in the process of figuring out how I'm going to pursue that work. But one of the things that my friend Eve, who I mentioned earlier, she had this amazing piece of wisdom for me on that, which I can't believe I've never thought of. And that's one of the things, like when you work with magic and medicine, sometimes the simplest medicine is the most potent. Like sometimes you really don't need to do like, I could totally do like really super powerful all robes out. I make way too much fun of robes. If you love wearing robes, know that I don't shame you for that. It's just like the specific thing that people think of.
Or the like, modern incarnation of the kaftan.
The kaftan, yeah.
That's a modern.
If you want to, yeah, but right, yeah, it's up right now. It's hashtag trending. If you feel like you want to put your robes on and have a ritual, that's one thing. And I definitely have done that around my ancestry. And sometimes the way that you've taught me and other people have spoken to that is just to speak to your ancestors and speak to them directly.
That is actually a hashtag that I use. Hashtag talk to your ancestors.
Hashtag talk to your ancestors. Check that hashtag out.
Yeah, that's simple.
But the thing that Eve gave me that is also very simple and way more physical is that she was like, why don't you buy a Palestinian cookbook and cook Palestinian food?
Okay, so I was also just going to invoke Eve when I was going to ask the next question, which is, Eve says this thing that she got from her teacher, Martine Prechtel, which is when you are looking for the traditions of your people, especially if they are just lost to you, look below the level of empire. Look to food, herbs, lullabies, fairy tales, and I love that. I love that so much. And so, yes, I was going to ask you specifically to talk about what you are talking about now, but it also reminded me of the time that we were at Spirit Weavers together last year. And our friend who lives in Israel, Genevieve Slonim, brought you...
She brought me, so actually, like, Genevieve and I had this kind of interesting conversation and online. And I was like, okay, I'm going to see her, like, we need to kind of hash this out. And she brought me this rose medicine that this Palestinian family makes, and it has water from their well that's really old. And then this candle, and it was just this, and I've actually like now have this experience. I have another person that I need to actually write back to. Like, I have all these people who are going to Israel bringing me soil, because that was one way. Like, I was like, oh, which by the way, if you happen to be going to Israel for any reason, bring me soil. And another thing about that, I'm going to talk about my cooking in a little bit, but another interesting thing was that right around the time when I started working on this, I started meeting all these Jewish women who were also medicine makers and witches, including Genevieve, including my friend Max, who's my birthday twin, and just kind of finding myself confiding in them and being like, I'm half Palestinian and you've been to Israel. Can you talk to me about the land? And having this interesting, because it's a pretty vulnerable thing. Israeli-Palestinian relations are really complicated and they're very triggering for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And instead of kind of feeling like, oh, we have to figure that out between the two of us, I just had people talk to me about land. I've had multiple people offer to take me, if I ever want to go there, to like take me places and like help me find things. And it's been this really healing thing for me to connect with people over. And it's just been interesting because it has totally just come up. Like, that's how it came up with Genevieve. And then she brought me these amazing gifts. It just totally made me cry on my altar and that I use and like I pray to. And it may feel really superficial to people who have more access to that, all those sides. Like, you know, a few years ago, that would have felt superficial to me, but it's really meaningful. And so this thing that my friend Eve told me was to get a Palestinian cookbook and cook from it. And that's something that I've been approaching, which is like, for one thing, I have all these food resonances that have never made sense in the context of my Finnish culture, like including my love of spice. Finnish culture, literally, okay, if I ever go to Finland, keep misusing literally. I think I've been ruined forever now. Look up literally. We don't have a word for it anymore, people. Oxford English Dictionary changed the meaning of it. Now we don't have the word for what it used to mean. It's terrible language. Anyways, so in Finnish culture, salt and pepper are considered like pretty impressive spices. Like you bust out that sweet salt and pepper and people are like, flavorful. Like this potato is so flavorful right now. OMG, WTF, you're cooking. So flavorful. So like I've always had this love of like hot sauce and spices and all these herbs and like really adding a lot of different things to my food. And I'm like, oh, that's where that comes from. And that's again that resonance thing where you're like, oh, like I don't have a home. I don't have a home in the Palestinian land. I don't have a land resonance with that, but I have a home in like these foods. I have a home in like harissa that my old boss makes, you know, like that belongs to me a little bit. And so just cooking that food and offering it to my ancestors, which like it's really interesting, that's a really old Finnish practice, like offering to spirits is still something that kids do, for instance, at Christmas. You offer, instead of milk and cookies for Santa, you offer to the tontu, who are the house spirits and who've kind of been like, who've survived the transformation by going where the information is going and becoming Santa's little helpers. But really they're these ancient spirits, and children go and put food out for them at Christmas time. And so like finding that practice and being like, oh, I can put Palestinian food out for my people, and just talking, like making the food and then talking to my ancestors and being like, see, I'm trying trying to speak to you. I feel like it has this, because one of the things about our culture is that we have this colonized mentality where we're extractive. We like to take. And to just be like, I want something, give me the thing that I'm missing, is really different from being like, I am giving you this, I am honoring you, I am offering you things, and if you give me something back, it would mean so much to me. And so it's been really meaningful. Plus, like, I'm learning to cook really good food. So it's like that mixing of the really spiritual and magical with the really mundane, which is where I feel like the ecotone of being a witch is. It's not about, like, just cauldrons and hexing and dancing naked in the moonlight, although it can be, and those are all fun things to do in your spare time. Do try that at home, kids. But it's also just about, like, yeah, cooking for your family, making infusions for your kids. Like, that's the daily magic of that. And bringing ancestry into that has been really, really meaningful for me.
Well, I think that's it. I think you just nailed the closing of this first interview that I've done for this podcast. Thank you, Milla.
Thank you, Amber. It's such a freaking honor to be your first guest.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm going to help Amber fill out the show notes, and we'll try and find a few things that you can look for in this work that we found to be useful resources. And we didn't even talk about like Max Dashu's book or any of those things, but I'm sure that'll come up a lot, and we'll stick all of that stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm very link happy and love providing resources for people. I wish I could just be a professional recommender, which I guess I kind of can be now. I'm the boss of this podcast. So yeah, we'll do that. And the book that Milla just mentioned by Max Dashu is Witches and Pagans, Women in European Folk Religion. And it's beautiful. And I would mention here that Milla and I are going to be teaching a class together on ancestral herbalism at the Good Medicine Confluence in Durango, Colorado. It starts May 18th, and it's like 5 days long. So you can check out the website for that. Just Google Good Medicine Confluence. It is an amazing conference. And Milla, why don't you tell people where you are online?
So you can find me by Googling the woman who married a bear, world's longest Google. Like half of the millennial audience just already fell off the map right there. And that's my Instagram handle too. I have a newsletter where I also get pretty link and share happy, and especially I like to share little tidbits about Scandinavian and Finno-Ugric culture, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but if you're into that, that's one way to get on board, and you can just do that through my website.
There's also just great herbal medicine tips and stories in there.
Yeah, that's part of my fun story medicine. I also, my current interest is how to live in the age of loneliness, and what the medicines of this crazy time can be for us. So if you're happy with that, I feel like most of my newsletter is just me kind of talking about how I'm working with that transition of realizing that this is a very interesting moment in time, and it's really hard for all of us to navigate it. And I make medicine and sell medicine and zines and my writings on my website, in my shop, and my medicine brand. It's such a... Okay, you have a hard time saying the word witch. I have a hard time saying the word brand. Yeah. Like, literally makes me puke. My line of medicines is called Fireweed and Nettle, which are very much part of my own story medicine, the medicine of the subarctic taiga where I grew up. So you can find me there as well. And thank you so much, Amber.
Yeah, thank you, Milla. I love you.
We love each other. We're gonna go hang out now.
Okay, bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy busy and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move. But I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.